Hey everyone, today I get to have the distinct honor of introducing you to a panel that you may not have seen before, and that is the Infinite Radiance panel. It is our newest one from the Infinite lineup, and it is something that I'm very excited about demonstrating and showing you because it complements Infinite Color and our other tools like Infinite Texture, Infinite Looks very nicely, especially when you're dealing with color and luminosity. Now, a lot of people have guessed that Radiance this time isn't specifically dealing with color itself, but luminosity. And luminosity is something that I have always struggled with when it comes to balancing it across the image. This image is shot by Bella Kotak with her model Scarlett, and they shot this beautiful floral portrait, and it was really, really intricate. And I love this because it had multitude of colors spanning across the image. Now, a panel like Infinite Radiance comes in because if you see the image itself, it has multiple colors, specifically red and green primarily, and the depth of each color is a little bit different. And what I mean by depth is how luminous or how radiant it is. And we can change this depth across the image by playing with channels. If you're not familiar with channels, it's going to be under your adjustment layer. And if you go to the channel mixer itself has a layout which is separated to red, green, and blue. You can also, instead of playing with these individual red, green, and blue drop-downs, you can change it to monochrome. And what this gives me an idea is how bright or dark at this current moment is that specific channel. So for instance, the blue in the hair, if I turn this on and off, you can see it's actually quite dark. And if I want to turn that up, I'm going to increase the blue channel here. But however, what happens is, if you increase the blue channel to bring up the brightness of the hair, you'll notice that over here where it says total, it should stay around 100 in order for you to get a perfectly balanced visual image. Now, when I bring this up, what happens is it increases the blue as well as some of the brightness in the entire image. Now, if I try to balance it manually, it takes a very long time because you have to get to 100 and you have to figure out, how much do I need to decrease each of them to get to 100? And it's never going to be perfect, and it's a pain. And the way that we can actually use this is by turning it to the Luminosity Blend mode. And now when I turn this on and off, you'll see that the blue's more luminous and the reds are darker because I brought it down a little bit, and the greens are much more neutral because I haven't really changed them so much. And it's reflected on this image. It's very, very interesting because the balance changes dramatically. However, as I mentioned, this is not a very user-friendly way to work. So what I decided to do instead was create this Radiance panel, which I used a lot in 3D LUT Creator and many other programs like that, but I wanted the functionality within Photoshop itself and a very simple interface without much bells and whistles. And the reason for that is the simpler the interface, the easier it is to use, but the more powerful it is for you to take control and use in your own images. Let me give you an idea exactly how that works. So for instance, now that I have my panel here in the color wheel, I simply need to click on the plus sign, or I can simply start dragging and it'll add a new channel mixer adjustment layer on top, just like you saw before. So I'll click on the plus sign. And now what you'll notice first and foremost is it automatically sets the channels to the gray channel here because it's set to monochrome. And the blending mode is automatically set to luminosity. The reason why I did that is because now when I move the slider around like this, you'll notice that the depth changes. So if I drag this point here to reds, you'll notice the reds themselves actually get really luminous. And the closer I drag it to, say, blue, notice the actual numbers here start changing. So you can see a blue of plus 57 because I pushed it towards the blue, and increased the reds as well because we're pushing it to this side of the spectrum. So it's going to be increasing the brightness of both. However, if I drag it down to this side, you'll notice that over here, the reds aren't very high, so they're really dark. The greens are really high, so anything that's specifically green gets a little bit brighter. But the image itself changes in how it's balanced. You can see the greens in the hair start popping out. So the greens are getting a little bit brighter there, while the reds are getting darker. So anytime you push this little guy here away from a specified color, that color will get darker. And then anytime you go towards a color, that color will get brighter. And interestingly enough, if I decide to right click with this placement of the cursor here at the bottom, what happens is it jumps to the other side. So it actually mirrors perfectly, and you can see the complementary balance happening here. And it's so fascinating because many people don't know the luminosity balance of the image can actually impact the feel quite a bit. It can impact how it looks visually and the balance it plays within the image. This is something you can use to make specific parts and specific colors darker without trying to do any crazy masking. And I love this because as I go around the image, it gives me multiple looks. And this is so fantastic because now my constant here stays at 100. So I'm not having to actually, manually juggle that. I can play with one wheel. It's super easy to do. And I love this. The other cool part is if you're trying to get a nice black and white, you can simply change it to normal and I can bring it around like this. And what happens is it also gives me a visual representation of what the balance is looking like. The way that I like to use it is I keep it to black and white like this. And because it's in normal, I can see the balance of the tonality. Now I can see exactly what parts are brighter, what parts are darker, and the center point and focus is what I'm going for here. So I like this a lot because it's giving me the center point of the model. It's keeping the background quite dark. Then I can change the blend mode back to luminosity, and I can turn this on and off to show you the difference it makes. So even though it's subtle, I think it really adds a nice rich tone to the image. And then when I complement that with something like Infinite Color Panel, what happens is it actually does a very, very interesting job in bringing the two together now that I have my color and luminosity balance together. So that's kind of how we use the Infinite Radiance panel. And there's many other things you could do with that. So for instance, if you're trying to only apply this to the hair, I can say increase the brightness of the hair like this, and then I can invert the mask. And then I can draw on the mask by using my regular brush tool. I'm going to just quickly go ahead and brush that in. And I can also increase the intensity. So if I go to 150 and then drag it here, what happens is it really, really takes another dimension of that hair. And then I can also brush in the eyes because the eyes are the same color. And now I have a much more striking image without doing a ton of work. And this is cool because now I can also add another one. And now that I have 150 as my strength, I can decide that, you know what, I actually want to apply this specifically just to the background where the roses are maybe something like this. I can invert that and then selectively paint in maybe the edges here so they kind of fade away nicely. It's like a vignette, but a very complex and specified vignette. And just like that, we have these two adjustment layers. And with these two layers here, I'm able to get that effect. The cool thing about that is if I come down to the specific layer, it remembers exactly where that point was, so I can easily change my mind if I decide, you know what, I want that actually darker. So there you have it. Aside from that, we have a refresh button here. We also have a randomize button. So if I decide I don't really know which way I want to go, I click shuffle, and then what happens is it'll just simply randomize. Let me click on 150. And there we go. So I can randomize the depth of how far it is that I really want to push this particular slider. If it's too much, just bring it back down to 100 and then click randomize again, and you can get a multitude of different looks. So that's how I particularly use it. You can also combine that with, say, other blend modes like soft light in case you want a nice, rich, contrasty look. And of course, you can also change other things as well. But now that it's on soft light, I can use the slider here as well. So in effect, you're able to kind of have many panels just because there's many different blending modes that you can use. You can also use blend if options as well. If you're not familiar with blend if options, I can target this specifically to just the shadows here like this and say okay. And then now this look is just in the deepest part of the shadows while keeping the skin tone nice and luminous. And I can just drag that down like that. And again, I'm having so much fun playing with this. I cannot wait to see what you guys think of this and how you actually interpret and incorporate this into your own specific workflow.